Friday, March 13th in the Ukrainian capital. I'm Carrie Oderman. Welcome to Hormatska's weekly wrap-up. It's been 6 years since flight MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine. Will the victims finally have their day in court? Joining us in the studio today is a partner at Ante Law Firm and an aviation expert, Andriy Gusk.
Nice to meet you.
And another international aviation expert and the former member of the High Qualification Commission of Judges of Ukraine, Andriy Kozlov.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us. This week, Dutch prosecutors said Russia is trying to sabotage the investigation. In July 2014, the plane flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur was shot down by what turned out to be a Buk missile fired from territory held by Kremlin-led troops in eastern Ukraine. 298 lives were lost that day. But the conflict, which has lasted longer than World War II, has taken thousands more. Why are soldiers being tried in a civilian court? Will evidence tying Russia to the crash finally force the international community to react? And what new information has been presented this week at the hearings? I'm an outsider looking in, and I'm going to ask the questions our English-speaking viewers have. Our guests will give us background, hopefully create some context, and cut through the noise. Christoph Grozo, he's a lead investigator at Bellingcat, shared his thoughts on the first week of hearings. He said there were some surprises, but before we take a look at what he said, I'd like to know what my in-studio guests think. The first week of the hearings. Any surprises? What are your feelings?
All surprises were coming from defense side because we knew since January that one of the defendants has two lawyers from Netherlands, and came up that it is Mr. Pulatov who decided to use his right for defense. And defense also declared that they are working with Moscow colleague and requested translation for her. And that mainly means that Russian Federation somehow participated in this case through a lawyer and through other legal proceedings, because prosecutor office had to file all the filings of Russian Federation in European Court of Human Rights, where in December of last year they filed some defense statements, and they are also used in this case. So we have a clear a lot of connection with Russian Federation and other legal proceedings in this case.
Any impressions from the first week from you?
For me, it was not a surprise, but I was highly impressed by the way the prosecutor's office behaved. It's absolutely transparent, it's non-biased as for me, and actually they propose, the defense, several ways of handling this case properly, because defense is obviously not familiar with the case yet. And also, what was surprising for me is that attorneys to the next of kin seem to be not quite proactive so far. So they even said at this stage that they are going to follow these proceedings, but they will only come up with the claims. So in my experience, relatives, attorneys usually are quite proactive. They are looking for more evidence, for more explanations, and so on, so on, so on, to support the prosecution.
This might be an indication of a strategy, though, that the next of kin has.
Or not enough will to deal with the case in its complexity and
Well, before we explore this issue more, let's take a look at Grozev's comments.
I think the first week gave results that were surprising even for us, who have been watching this case since the beginning. I think it brought much more specific results and concreteness than I would have expected in the first week. It gave a preview of what evidence the joint investigation team has gathered. And it came with very strong words of warning to Russia to not meddle anymore, if at all this is a realistic warning. In terms of influencing the actual legal court case. There's no way for Russia to do anything about it. I think what Russia may not be aware of is how independent the court system in the Netherlands is. It's independent of the government. It's completely, the judges could care less about what the government thinks. And there are many cases when individuals or companies, and including a company that I ran in the Netherlands, have sued the government and won multi-million and billion court cases against the government. So the Dutch court is extremely independent, is extremely professional, and there's absolutely no way they will be brought into a situation where they would just misplace evidence or believe propaganda versus hard facts. It already, the implications are clear. Yesterday, in the second day of test of presenting the case, the Joint Investigation Team actually quoted its own findings that confirmed the very close involvement of FSB and GRU in activities in eastern Ukraine. This has never been said publicly by an actual investigative body, in a European investigative body before. It was a preview of what's to come. And in the next 2 years, there will be hard evidence played on video in the courtroom and phone calls played out in audio in the courtroom that will prove, because that's part of the whole case of investigating the chain of command of who allowed for MH17 to be shot down, will prove the actual involvement on the ground of Russian secret services and military in eastern Ukraine. And there's no way that this will not have a major implication on the rest of the world, because while now Russia can say, well, nobody's proven that, and yeah, we don't believe journalists and Bellingcat investigators, this will be the first time that an actual investigative body with a court judgment will actually set the facts straight, and the facts will include the facts of involvement of Russian military and secret services in eastern Ukraine. The Dutch court is extremely conscious of the pain that the families of the victims are still going through, and I think that's the primary driver that will make the judges decide to not allow spurious requests for delays. Typically, in any sort of criminal case, there's a lot of little tricks that the defense is doing to cause a delay as much as possible. And I think it was clear from the first 2 days that the court is not going to allow that. So I don't think it will stretch to 4 to 5 years. I do think it will be about 2 years and no less than that. But 2 years is enough to keep the fire burning and to keep global media focused on this. I believe that the next suspects are going to be of a higher level in the chain of command. I think there will be military, and I think there will be Secret Service officers. And ultimately, I do believe that the chain of command of indictments will go to somebody at the political level, be that a deputy minister or the head of the southern region of the military command of Russia, or maybe even the minister. But there's no way that the way the Dutch legal system works, they have to get to the person who is responsible, who authorized the delivery of the book and the use of the book. And it's clear from now that this cannot be the people on the ground. It was somebody from Moscow, from Russia. Well, my estimate is that there will be at least 2 or 3 in the mid-level chain of command, such as generals that were probably in retirement but were allocated to curate the separatists and the militants. And this will be the second wave. And then I expect there will be a third wave as well of somebody of the type of the head of the Southern Military Command Unit in Rostov, or maybe even Surkov or Malofeev, who knows. So I think in total, probably another 6 to 8 defendants I expect to be brought in front of the court. It's an important step for the relatives to now claim their stake here in terms of damages, but they cannot really collect it from Girkin or from Donbas. But the facts that will be claimed here will be automatically reused in the European Court of Human Rights and in other civil litigation by the families against the Russian state. And then the Russian state will be on the hook. And it's an enforceable hook because the Russian state owes a lot of property around the world. It owes airplanes, and any country that decides to go after the enforcement of the claim of the relatives will be able to just confiscate property. And that's going to be how the relatives can actually get their money back, or to get the money they're owed. My prediction is that at some point before the end of the case and before the third wave of indictments, the Russian government will probably decide to come to a compromise and to say, yeah, well, sorry, yeah, it was a Russian book, but the government was not responsible. It was some rogue officers, and oh, by the way, they died already in Syria. So too bad, but we acknowledge the responsibility of making that mistake and making that possible, but we don't acknowledge that we authorize that, and we're going to pay the families.
Okay, that was, of course, Andriy Gusk. He's been Bellingcat's lead investigator on this. He said a lot there, and he talked a lot about responsibility. Do you guys just want to pick out some of the things that you agree with or disagree with his take from the first week again?
Mainly, I would agree with what was said now, but just to give some more implications that, yes, now few legal proceedings are going on. We have International Court of United Nations where Ukraine filed claim against Russian Federation. We have a case in European Court of Human Rights where relatives next of kin filed claim against Russian Federation. And now we have this criminal proceeding. And GIT criminal proceeding is going on. And it's focused now on the crew who were launched this missile from this book and all the chain of command. And of course, this court is something like a test and precedent that will be used in future when the next trials will go for all the chain of the command. Because now it's very hard to investigate something that is going on in Russia. For example, in this brigade, 53 brigade, where a book was somehow transferred to Ukraine and back. And most of the evidences, those are some photos, some phone conversations together with witnesses, and now the same regarding transfer of book. And if this court will acknowledge this approach, how all the evidence are compared together, and if court will do the final decision with such an types of evidences, it would be applicable also for the next steps regarding the chain of the command. So it's a matter of high importance on how court will evaluate those evidence in this particular case.
So it's important that the court remains correct so it can set precedents. So then in the second, third, and fourth waves where they're going to get really the chain of command that the precedence is set.
We will see the first decisions, procedural decisions on 23rd of March. We expect that the court will decide on all the requests from prosecutor office, mainly how witnesses should be investigated additionally, or how the evidence will proceed with evidence, and what would be the decision regarding translation issues and other issues filed by the defense regarding the complicity of the file of the case. For example, will be additional information regarding, for example, closure of airspace by Ukraine, and it will be the first signs of how court will treat defense and prosecutor office.
Okay, well, I'm in a great position because I've got two experts right here, and this whole discussion has about something to do with responsibility. Who's responsible for giving the command? Who's responsible for pulling the trigger? Who's responsible for leaving the airspace open after the crash? Who is responsible for the site of the crash? Is this common in an accident like this?
Let me tell you this. First of all, I would like to mention that listening to Mr. Gusk, well, it came to my mind that our perception sometimes is very different because Russian meddling and Russian destructive role is our Ukrainian everyday routine. So it does not surprise me much, and none of us said that. This is the first thing. The other one is, of course, now we have, well, a first episode in this series. And we have two antagonists on stage, and these antagonists are charged with what they did. Exactly, they supported a transfer of this book into its firing spot, and they, well, helped to withdraw it afterwards, and probably they were within that chain of command which authorized firing this missile. But yet, of course, not enough. And I would tell you this, it is just not possible for such a sophisticated, state-of-the-art weapon as Buk rocket system, missile system is, just to pass through the state frontier of the Russian Federation without everyone knowing about it. And after all, there is a high command, and on the top of this high command is the president of the Russian Federation. It's just not possible to use any armed forces belonging to Russian Federation abroad. And all those lies about combatants, being militia as combatants and real combatants in disguise of militia, they will also come to the surface sooner or later. I'm quite sure of this. Because, as Mr. Kozlov also said, if we have so many details, even at this introductory stage, you just can't imagine what we'll have when it will be heard on the merits. So that's the story as it is. And then, well, I would not be so sure about res judicata in this case, but I'd like to say that many facts will at least be tested during this court examination, during these hearings, and will be used further on in the ongoing investigation of JIT.
Do you think any of the facts that or let me put it this way, the facts that they'll be presenting are going to be very well proven because they don't want to run the risk of having it look like they haven't done their homework? It was interesting for me to hear from Kozlov about what could happen next. It seems that when you go to the courts, you're always playing the long game. And right now, 6 years after this crash, 6 years after Crimea has been illegally annexed, is right now when the clock is finally running out for the Russian Federation. A lot of these issues are coming in front of international courts. Is this going to open up a new phase for Ukrainian-Russian relations because the time is running out for Russia playing the long game with the court systems?
I'm afraid that Russia doesn't think that Ukraine has any subjective role in this, except for providing our investigators to the JIT. Unfortunately, they don't treat this country seriously so far. But I'm quite sure that this call from Hague is quite alarming for Russia. And they understand the complexity of research and how much has been done, and that no technicality will go aside, will be explained, and provided proper evidence to support it. So it's really serious for Russia now.
Let's talk.
And they will have to find some maneuver, I think.
Let's talk about how the downing of MH17 ties into the conflict. How does this change the narrative at all? If Russia becomes responsible, will the international community have to react differently by having Australians and Dutch on board to the extent that they were? Will it play a role in how the international community reacts in the future to Russian aggression?
Well, yes, I think so, because, in 2014, when this tragedy happened, the narrative changed in most of Europe and in most of the world, because no one really got it before, how hard this conflict is and how much Russia is involved into this conflict. And when this happened, when almost 300 people lost their lives for nothing, just being on a plane, flying to Malaysia, well, everyone understood that this is pretty serious, and that this tragedy may touch them no matter how far they are. And I'm quite sure that if the case is successful for the prosecution, and these people are accused and found guilty.
Yeah, I would add that for Russian Federation, this approach, when they always saying that those something like green men that not us, it wouldn't be on the table in future due to this case, because there are too much details. There are too much intercepted conversations where FSB and GRU involved. We heard from prosecutor office that directly GRU hackers hacked Malaysian police, for example. We heard that there are threats to witnesses from Russian Federation. We heard that now prosecutor particularly asked this court by 23rd of March to decide to check whether Russia made something with evidences that they provided to European Court of Human Rights, because European Court of Human Rights cannot analyze evidence like ordinary court does. And if experts will show up that Russia even tries to manipulate with images, with video material, so that is quite changing the attitude to Russian Federation. And what prosecutor said that what differs this MH17 case from other downings of the planes that happens is first that it's not a legal military action, something like to defend some country. So it's not the case. And secondly, usually someone takes responsibility over such things. And here, even Iran, that it's the severe country actually, and they took some responsibility for the last crash that happened. And here, what differs this case that Russian Federation still says that no. And what we heard, right, that at the end probably they will have no choice but to admit this involvement.
You bring up a good point that actually tied into your point very well. So a Buk missile carrier is a tracked vehicle that can't go unnoticed if it passes through your neighborhood. So there were witnesses.
And it was not unnoticed. There are many witnesses, there are many videos and photos. Yes.
And this week it really became clear how many witnesses, or not how many, but there were witnesses, and there were people that were afraid for their lives because it has not become uncommon in Europe that Russian retribution has a very long arm. What's being done to keep these witnesses safe?
Well, the prosecutor in this case, he mentioned several cases in Great Britain, Bulgaria, in Germany, in Qatar, in Turkey, when people were just killed according to official police reports or court decisions. And it was done by Russian military intelligence or Russian FSB. And according to those authorities. So all these people who are mentioned as, for example, M58 witness or S27 witness, of course, they understand that Russian Federation poses direct threat not only to the investigation in a whole, but also to their own lives. And this is why all these people are kept in high secrecy. And this is why they are being questioned by the examining magistrate in the absence of either prosecution or defense. So this is why their names will never be disclosed, I think so.
Not only the names.
Unless something changes in Russia, I would say.
Those examining magistrate even dismisses the date of the interrogation.
Good
so
point.
Just not to tie to some individual. So there are a lot of security actions that are taken, and defense continues to say that if this court will decide to interrogate those witnesses in the court hearing, it would be of a high risk. So it's better to do it further with magistrate, with separate judge, and with defense and prosecutor office not knowing even how they will be interrogated. Just in written form they can ask some questions, and maybe second round of interrogation can happen if defense or prosecutor office will decide. But those witnesses are only few of them. Prosecutor said that there are dozens of witnesses, and there are a lot of witnesses who put their name, and actually this M58 put his name into the case materials, but still prosecutor office is not disclosing it. And we know that from Russian expert, Mr. Lukashevich, who said that he also put his name, and he in a severe position in the Russian Federation, but he did a lot of investigation, honest investigation and analysis, and he knows what are the official statements in Russian Federation. So if even this man is a witness in this case, so we can imagine how far investigation goes and how much evidences are collected here.
Fortunately, Lukashevich, whom I admire so much for his strong and brave position, he has sort of an immunity in Russia because he is too visible. He's one of the chief engineers for Russian space shuttle program.
So it'd be a self-fulfilling prophecy if anything would happen to him.
Himself to say it. But still, it's interesting that even he was interrogated in this case. So it says that there are a lot of witnesses here, and especially those people who were tracking this book and were making some photos, and we know that they also gave some explanations. So that helped GIT to establish the whole road that book came to Ukraine and from Ukraine.
So we have witnesses in danger. We have troll farms that have been working since hacking. And as these things were listed off, you sat here and you shook your head because these are familiar items to you, as you mentioned. As large of a tragedy as the crash was, can keeping it in the news help Ukraine internationally? And what can we expect?
It can help, and moreover, of course, we all understand that what is Russia saying about this case and the circumstances of this case sometimes are completely just looks like stupid or something. But prosecutor office and this court took everything very seriously, and they are checking the every statement that the Russian Federation does.
Holistically, in every possible way.
So they are checking everything, and just to avoid any accusations that they are not biased or something. And that what makes this process so important, that all the versions that Russian Federation is keeps providing, like prosecutor, I liked how he said that by now, today, Russia still didn't come up with any final version what happened. So still there are a lot of versions, and every single version is analyzed in this investigation and dismissed, except of the one and only, that book came from particular Russian Federation military base and to particular point, and it was launched in the presence of and in high involvement of FSB, GRU, and Russian forces.
And those are the
and
facts.
probably, and I think that the crew on board was Russian as well. And one of the witnesses said that he heard that were M58. He said that he had heard Russian accents, and like in English, there are many accents in Russia according to the territory. And of course, people from Donetsk, for example, they just read Russian accent quite exactly.
Clearly,
not southern Russian. I mean something upper to the pole.
So there's evidence here. Let's talk about how the court case is going to be decided. And what I mean by that is there were a couple different ways that this could have been taken to court. There was going to be a UN tribunal. There was discussions with in the Netherlands, the European Court of Human Rights. Is how that's going now the best way to solve the problem?
Well, of course, an international tribunal established by the United Nations would be the best solution for all.
But Russia blocked that.
But Russia blocked that because, as Andriy once quoted a prosecutor, and prosecutor in turn quoted Solzhenitsyn, well, lie can be concealed only by the way of violence, and violence can be hidden only by the way of more lies. So that's it. And the only option seemed to be available so far was national court in Netherlands, because according to, at least as regards one of the articles of indictment, I mean Article 168 of Dutch Criminal Code, which is extermination of the aircraft, which caused deaths of people on board, the Netherlands already had jurisdiction. The rest of the jurisdiction regarding murder, in particular regarding Ukrainian citizens who may be involved, well, it was under bilateral agreement between Ukraine and the Netherlands. So that's why this choice seems to be quite natural, because also the leading role was given to the Netherlands in the investigation of accident itself. So naturally they have most of the evidence available right now. And actually, one of the pleadings from one of the motions from the prosecutor office was that they have to examine the reconstruction of the plane at the nearby military airbase.
And I should say that this is probably fastest way to prosecute somebody in this case, because it looks strange maybe for you and for not for a lawyer, but this is the fast way. So and this decision that prosecutor made just to pick 4 individuals that evidence are ready to prosecute them and to separate them into some case and court case and start it immediately. That is a very good decision, precedent-making decision, because there are case overall is going on. And now we have 4 particular individuals, and the court already started. So that makes prosecution fast. So this is I think the best decision that could be in this situation.
Outside the Russian embassy in the Netherlands, chairs were set up commemorating the 298 passengers and crew members that perished. We have some footage from a family that lost loved ones, where they were speaking about what this means to them. Let's have a look.
There's so much attention on the people who were killed in the plane, 298 people, but we know at least 13,000 people have been killed on the ground in Ukraine, and we're conscious that the vast majority of those people are civilians, like our son, people who just wanted to go on with their lives and to live their lives normally, which is every person's right, changing very quickly.
We're not in control of that. We're here to be witnesses to a good and thorough court process, and we're here to represent Jack.
There's powerful words. These people can't get their family back, but they'd like to know really who they can point a finger at. They'd like to know that they can say, this person did it, and we know that. Is this going to be a result eventually?
You see, what I noticed when I was listening to the 2 days of this court proceedings, that words Russian Federation I heard more often than even names of the accused individuals. So. And that's one of the main surprises in the first 2 days, that even prosecutor makes it very intellectual by citing the Nobel election of Solzhenitsyn. So it's also somehow points how the aim of how prosecution sees the aim of this process. Yes, I think eventually, even now, we all understand and we see from this empty chairs that we see every year near the Russian embassy. So we see that actually the world knows who did it. But the court proceedings and the criminal proceedings should go on and should finally lead to the chain of the command. And we see that prosecution and court has this aim and tries to do it the fastest way.
What are the options?
You know what? In my experience of dealing with relatives of the deceased in such cases, actually, for the best of them, it's justice is more important, and I mean justice as a conformity to the truth, is more important than any compensation. In many cases, it is so. And I would say that now, when everyone sees that Russia lies and Russia is meddling, probably the world view to some previous events with Russian involvement will change as well, including Ukrainian-Russian paragraphs of the past. So this is it, and I hope that, well, these people will go through these hard times, and they will know the truth, and the justice will be done.
How can Russia be made accountable, though? These people want the truth out there, but how can Russia be made to feel the verdict if it then goes the way that Ukraine would like it to go?
I would like to start by saying that Russia is already feeling it. Russia is feeling it just by the fact that this court started, and it started this way. And even some attempts of attorneys to look back to Ukraine or something didn't find any support from prosecution or even court, or again relatives, or media. So so much efforts just to avoid this proceedings or to make another accents failed by Russian Federation, and I think they will feel it every day when this court is going on, and at the end, this is also a money issue, because when we saw, for example, Naftogaz Ukraine won Stockholm arbitral award received in their favor, actually Russian Federation had no option but to make some deal. And so when decisions are starting coming up from United Nations Court, from European Court of Human Rights Court, from these proceedings, I think they will feel it, because as from Belgrade representative said that Russia has a lot of property all over the world, and it is not only property issue, it's political issue. So in every event, in every political discussion, any politics from a lot of countries, from Ukraine, from United States, from United Kingdom, from Netherlands, can point out to any Russian representative or diplomat that here, this is a problem, is not solved, and you didn't acknowledge yet your responsibility. So it's like Carthage should fall. So every time someone can say it to any Russian representative. So I think they are feeling it, and that's why they are trying to do something every day.
Well, there are many other cases. Andriy mentioned the case in the European Court for Human Rights, and I would also mention this case in International Court of Justice. And there are indications that Ukraine won't be alone there. I think that there are indications that, for example, Australia and Netherlands and probably Malaysia may follow and file their claims in the International Court of Justice, also related to this crash, at least. And, well, Andriy is right, there's a lot of Russian property, and there are a lot of Russian ships and a lot of Russian airplanes, and this is all arrestable, of course. But furthermore, I would say that unfortunately, from the business point of view, cutting all the links with Russia is, of course, a bit dangerous. But at the same time, I believe there are things more of much higher value and more important than business as usual. In case of when some country becomes, in fact, a sort of criminal organization at every stage of its international activity, and there's a big problem for the whole international community, which should be dealt with before it's not too late.
That would be a great way to wrap up the conversation, but we have to address one more thing that's happening right now. Ukraine's closing its borders today. The coronavirus is all over Europe and the world. Is this going to affect how the proceedings are handled in the Netherlands? Will there be any delays?
Again, what we see from the first days of this court that a lot of things were done to prepare this court hearings. So even separate building was built, and all the complex was built just for this particular case and ongoing cases that will be with other accused persons. And especially they did all the preparation connected with COVID-19 virus, and we see that we have two backup judges, and they are ready to step in the case, and they're hearing the case from the very beginning. So even if something happens like illness or something, and we have video online translation, online broadcast, so everything is done for these hearings not to be interrupted by some force majeure circumstances. Of course, something unexpected can happen, but what we see and clearly can say that it is very high performance in preparations of all these hearings. So I think they will not delay due to even virus issue.
Okay, thanks.
I wouldn't be so optimistic because, well, this virus is really contagious and it has much harder consequences than other season flus, for example. But yet, the president of the court in one of the video addresses mentioned that if there is an outbreak of COVID-19 in the Netherlands, well, the hearing may be delayed and adjourned. So the next date is 23rd of March. Let's see what's going on in the court and with the virus.
All right, we'll be watching what happens on the 23rd of March. Now let's have a recap of other news from Eastern Europe from this past week. A last-minute move has set the path for extending Vladimir Putin's rule until 2036. The president made a surprise stop-in at the Russian parliament on March 10th to deliver a speech that would finally clarify his plans after the end of his final presidential term. Long story short, he's lining himself up to stay in power for 2 more terms by supporting a last-minute constitutional amendment from his ruling party. It would reset his presidential term clock to 0 once the changes to the Russian constitution go through. A consultative council may be created at the Minsk Trilateral Contact Group with the participation of the Normandy format states as overseers. It's set to facilitate dialogue between Kyiv and the occupied Donbas. The news emerged from a circulated intent agreement between Ukraine and the 2 puppet states that should be signed at the next TCG meeting on March 25th. For the first time, a dialogue platform may include the unrecognized Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic as a distinct side of the conflict. The Kremlin has already praised the idea. Cases of the COVID-19 coronavirus have been reported in almost all of Europe. Countries all over the world have taken measures to prevent the spread of the deadly virus. A nationwide quarantine has been implemented in Ukraine, leading to cancellations of mass events and closure of educational institutions. The country is also closing its borders for foreigners starting March 15th for at least 2 weeks. As of March 13th, 2 cases and 1 death was confirmed in Ukraine. Bulgaria has declared a month-long state of emergency, whilst Moldova banned all foreigners from coronavirus-hit countries and suspended flights to European countries to contain further spread of the virus. In Romania, PM-designate Florian Kitsu dropped his candidacy for office just before the vote in Parliament. The move means President Klaus Iohannis may put forward the interim PM Ludovic Orban, despite being ousted from the cabinet in a no-confidence vote just last month. The latter also volunteered to isolate himself among the spread of the coronavirus and urged other PNL party members to follow suit. I'd like to thank our guests again, Andriy Gusk and Andriy Kozlov. They're both aviation experts, and we talked about MH17. That's all we have for today, but that's not all you're going to hear from me. We'll be back next week with an English-speaking look at this week's news from Ukraine and Eastern Europe. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and we're here to inform you, but we'd also like to hear from you and know what you're thinking. You've got a question? Tweet it at us. I'm Carrie Oderman, and that's the week's news wrapped up. But wait, Hormatska provides news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for over 5 years now. And the media landscape in Ukraine is changing. Let me tell you how to make sure that stories about Ukraine keep coming from Ukraine.
I would like us to be heard, not only in Ukraine, but all over the world.
No bread for 3 months.
Not one, but look how many. There's bread here and there.
You are going against the God.
Of course, point number 1.
Thanks for the invitation.
When will this all end?
The number of political prisoners has grown.